And now, once again, let me welcome everyone to our webinar on Pulling Together for the Chesapeake. Today's event is part of our series of Conservation Innovation Forums and is convened by the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School. James Levitt, who's the director of the program on conservation innovation at the Harvard Forest at Harvard University and a fellow at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in Cambridge, Massachusetts, will be starting us off today.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here with 4 people in the room that I'm sitting with and 47 of you virtually who have joined us to talk about a very interesting new initiative going on in the Chesapeake Bay in the eastern United States. We have participants from Boston to Belize who are interested in this topic of terrestrial and marine resource conservation. I happen to have next to me Karina Mahung, who is a fellow with the Acadian Internship in Maine this summer, who has come to the United States from Belize to study what we're doing in this country. So I know that the implications of this discussion will reverberate to a very large demographic area really across the globe. Now, Joel and John, are you there on the other end of the line?
Yes, we're here. Yes, we're here.
Great. So I'm about to introduce our guest today. The first guest is Joel Dunn. Joel is the executive director of the Chesapeake Conservancy, which is a new nonprofit organization, an NGO in Annapolis, Maryland, that is helping to pull together federal, state, nonprofit, academic, and private sector representatives in a new initiative to think of the Chesapeake Bay, which extends from Cooperstown, New York to Newport News, Virginia, into one large landscape conservation area. Joel comes from the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University and has really done a remarkable job just in the last several years in getting the Chesapeake Conservancy and the John Smith Trail, which we'll talk about today, off the ground. Our second guest is Dunn and Maounis. John is the superintendent of the National Park Service's Chesapeake Bay office, and as part of his responsibility, he manages the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail. I should say that this trail, in an interesting way, is a water trail and a land trail, which echoes in the 21st century the famous land trail that we know as the Appalachian Trail today, which crosses the eastern seaboard as well. John has a long and distinguished history with the National Park Service. You can see on your screen all of the many things that he has done. He is a veteran of this movement and has been authorized by the Congress of the United States to help coordinate his work with organizations across his region to do large landscape conservation in the Chesapeake. So let me begin by asking briefly Joel and then John, how were you first attracted to the Chesapeake region and the conservation opportunities that it presents? Joel.
Thank you very much, Jim. I came here in 2002 as a fellow to Senator Lieberman, and I worked on Capitol Hill. And in exploring the policy world of Washington, D.C. and the conservation policy, I wound up going outside in my spare time and I fell in love with the Chesapeake Bay. So when I graduated from the Nicholas School of the Environment, I moved back to Washington, D.C., and I shortly thereafter met Pat Noonan, who was the chairman of the Conservation Fund at the time, and the rest is history.
That's great. And John, I know you were assigned here, but I understand that you have a great affection for the Chesapeake as well. What drew you to the area?
Well, aside from the job, I was given the opportunity to oversee the National Park Service's Chesapeake efforts, in particular at that point, the Chesapeake Bay Gateways and Water Trails network. And it was a great opportunity, and we were able to build on that foundation to do some other interesting things, which we'll talk about. The Water Health Network really is the whole covers the whole watershed in many respects, but it's so it was a foundation for some of the stuff we'll talk about later.
All right, very good. I understand that you all have quite a colorful presentation for us, and I will let you take it away as soon as it pops up on our screens. There you go. Joel, I think you have control of the cursor and can proceed at will.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. So I'm Joel Dunn. I love the Chesapeake Bay. I love its history. I love its cultures. I love its wildlife, its landscapes, its geography. I wanted to thank Jim, Harvard Forest, and the Kennedy School for providing us with this opportunity to talk with you today. In the next 30 minutes, John and I are going to cover three main points. We want to give you some background about the Chesapeake Bay and why it's considered a national treasure. We want to inform you just a bit about the challenges the Chesapeake Bay faces today and the effort to restore it. And we're going to inform you about the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail and how we see it as a framework for a collaborative conservation effort between local, state, federal agencies, and private organizations to conserve the region's land and heritage. We hope you, at the end of this webinar, have an understanding of how powerful this collaborative effort can be and how much we need to tackle these big challenges like restoring the Chesapeake and conserving our lands. As Jim mentioned, the Chesapeake Conservancy is a relatively young organization, but we're working to develop partnerships to create a network of conserved landscapes and special places within the watershed that sustain the Chesapeake's unique natural history and culture, strengthen the connection between people in the watershed, and encourage the exploration and celebration of the Chesapeake region. We're really proud to partner with the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and many other agencies and organizations, including the National Geographic Society. So in 1984, President Reagan called the Chesapeake Bay a national treasure and committed the nation to the long and necessary effort to restore it. Then in 2009, President Obama called it a national treasure in a historic executive order dedicated to protecting and restoring the Chesapeake. And John's going to talk about that in a bit. The Chesapeake watershed stretches across more than 64,000 square miles. It encompasses parts of 6 states, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia. It also includes the District of Columbia. Now there's 17 million people living in this watershed. Interestingly, the Chesapeake land-to-water ratio is 14-1, so that's the largest of any coastal water body in the world. That's why actions on the land have such a big impact on the bay's health. Within the watershed, there are many important landscapes and special places worthy of protection, including, this slide here shows a bunch of the focal areas there, but these include Civil War battlefields, wetland systems like Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, which is our Everglades of the North, great rivers, including the Potomac and the Susquehanna, which is the longest river in the east coast, productive farmlands like Lancaster County, forests of the Shenandoah Valley, charming towns of the Eastern Shore, unique tidewater Virginia communities, and islands like Tangier Island, where the people have a unique English dialect.
So why are these places treasured? They're treasured because they play a role in our culture and they played a role in our collective imagination. These are places that we've recreated, that have sustained us. They're significant to our history as a people. These are places that American Indians have been here for thousands of years. The Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Underground Railroad, the Civil War have all played out within this very landscape. And these are very important places for habitat of iconic species. whether it's birds in the North American flyway or, of course, those delicious blue crabs.
The Chesapeake's natural resources really made it a terrific location for, well, American Indian communities, as John mentioned, that lived here for over 10,000 years, but also for the English settlers when they arrived and established America's first permanent English settlement at Jamestown in Virginia in 1607. Now, a lot has changed since 1607, both environmentally and culturally. In particular, historic and current human-related influences have significantly changed the Chesapeake landscape, converting forests to other uses. Actually, we're currently losing forests at a rate of about 100 acres a day, and over 6 million acres, that's about 45% of the forest and wetland resources in the watershed, are still vulnerable to development. In addition, the regional population is now currently topping 17 million and climbing fast, and our collective activities are eliminating tens of thousands of acres of open space each year. I also wanted to note that our problems stem from both how many people live here and how they live here. And by that I mean the difference between the percentage in population growth and land conversion percentage that you can see on this slide. The wasteful conversion of open space to develop land removes the bay's filters and buffers like wetlands and forests, and this, among other things, had led to a massive decline in water quality to the point where this continued development is dangerous and even unethical. One symptom of these land use problems, combined with other influences like disease and overharvesting, is the cataclysmic decline in commercial oyster harvests in the bay. And if you look at this graph, it goes from 6 million all the way down to virtually zero.
So these issues with the water, with the bay, led to federal involvement, EPA using the Clean Water Act, resulting in a series of agreements with the states within the watershed, the 1983 agreement, 87, and then finally this agreement in 2000 that actually has components in relation to land conservation, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In addition, there's many components of this broad landscape have been set aside, have been designated as units of the national park system, wildlife refuges, trails, national forests, heritage areas, and of course there's scores of state parks and forests.
So the Bay program demonstrates the value of collaboration, but there's with among federal agencies, but there's also a significant state conservation programs in response to the conservation problems in the Chesapeake. In Pennsylvania, the Farmland Preservation Program, State Heritage Area Program, Conservation Landscapes Initiative have all been hugely successful. Unfortunately, some of those key funding mechanisms are currently under threat of elimination, but the Chesapeake Conservancy and others are lobbying hard to prevent that. In Maryland, Program Open Space, State Heritage Areas programs, and the Greenprint program have worked to protect also hundreds of thousands of acres of critical habitat, farmlands, and parks. In Virginia, the Virginia Land Preservation Tax Credit Program, which is an innovative program, the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and the Virginia Conservation Land Needs Assessment, which is a conservation planning tool, have also protected thousands of acres. And I'd be remiss, now I don't have a slide on this, but to not mention the state of Delaware, which has a terrific conservation program and has protected significant acreage in the Nanticoke River watershed, which is one of the most pristine and beautiful rivers in the Chesapeake. In addition to these state programs, there are some really important federal programs that have become cornerstones of this collaborative effort in the Chesapeake.
So this is a very selective timeline, and I realize there's many things that are missing from it. But just to provide some context in terms of a variety of efforts over the years to think about, to look at, to attempt to conserve and provide a framework for conservation of this large landscape. And I would begin with a special resource study that the Congress asked the National Park Service to to undertake in 1992 that resulted in a recommendation to establish 5 heritage areas within the Chesapeake. In '96, the Rappahannock River Valley National Wildlife Refuge was established, really to protect a major portion of that river valley. The Chesapeake Bay Gateways and Water Trails Network, authorized in '98, resulting in the designation of about 2,600 miles of water trails and their development over time. The Bay Program goal agreement in 2000 again set a goal to protect 20% of the permanently protect 20% of the Bay watershed. Another congressionally mandated special resource study to think about the whole Chesapeake, and the idea of what resulted in a recommendation to establish a national park like I don't think many of us can sort of imagine at this point. The Chesapeake Conservancy, founded in 2005, begins immediately organizing for the John Smith Trail. The trail itself is designated by Congress in late 2006. Another effort to look at the landscapes associated with Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad in 2008 resulted in a recommendation to establish a National Historical Park that really, again, with an attempt to conserve with state and other partners to conserve this landscape. The executive order that we've referred to in 2009 requires land conservation and public access goals be established. The 20% of the watershed permanently protected by 2010 is actually achieved in 2010, but much more work to be done. The executive order results in a strategy and makes a recommendation establishes a goal really to protect 2 million additional acres and add 300 new public access sites, and lays the framework for a Chesapeake Treasured Landscape initiative. America's Great Outdoors is launched by the President, and one of the outcomes of that is some focus on some of the work in the Chesapeake. And finally, something we're going to talk about a little bit later is the idea of focusing federal land and water conservation funds in a way to foster collaboration and build on existing authorities and existing federal assets. Let's see. So 3 cornerstones for this collaborative: the executive order, the John Smith Trail, and then this Chesapeake LWCF collaborative. And we're gonna walk through these in a little bit more detail. This Treasured Landscape Initiative, this concept comes out of, again, the executive order, bringing together partners who, representing the states, nonprofits, localities, and other federal partners to really, again, develop this broad-ranging agenda for conserving the landscape. An effort by the Chesapeake Conservancy and the Environmental Law Institute builds upon that and makes some further recommendations. And a report comes out, again required by the executive order, ultimately resulting in this executive order strategy, and the Chesapeake Bay Commission, representing the states, builds on that and makes some additional recommendations, and the Chesapeake Conservancy worked in partnership with the Bay Commission to do that. So the executive order strategy lays out what we might think of as an aspirational goal: conserve landscapes treasured by citizens for water quality, working lands, lands that are important for their cultural, indigenous, and community values, as well as expanding public access. So a multiplicity of values. And then to protect an additional 2 million acres by 2025 and add 300 new public access sites. The agenda that came out of that collaboration between all of the partners and that gets embedded in this executive order strategy results in, again, this long list of things, many of which are in play right now, and three of which we're going to just touch upon very briefly.
One that I think is really important that we in fact start out discussing is a private special places fund that the Chesapeake Conservancy established this year with a founding donation in memory of a great conservationist, Gene Douglas. We started the Special Places Fund to be a private grant program for conservation and access projects, and we're currently working to increase resources for this fund. Actually, just yesterday I got word of another $150,000 that's going to go into the fund. So we're making some progress on this. We have a website set up for it if you want to learn more information about it, or if you have somebody you think that might want to donate to it, please do check it out. And, you know, we're working in tandem with the Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies to identify priorities where those funds would be used. And John's going to talk about that.
Okay. So, again, one of the actions that the group really wanted us to focus on was this idea of a priority system based on the great work that, in particular, that GIS-based, the work that Virginia and Maryland have done, Greenprint being one of those systems, and to really develop a platform that would layer a variety of GIS data that would foster collaboration, identify strategic opportunities, and that would be publicly accessible, but for the whole watershed. And that would not only have the state priorities, federal priorities as they exist, land trusts as they exist, and localities, and then begin to, again, identify opportunities.
So now that you've seen the state programs, and John talked about the federal programs, about the Landscape Conservation Initiative, you know about some of the building blocks that were in place. But let's talk now about the framework, and that with the John Smith National Historic Trail. So Captain Smith of England explored and mapped the Chesapeake between 1607 and 1609. He did this in a small 30-foot open boat called a shallop with 12 crew members. He was a sailor, a soldier, a slave, an explorer, a president of Jamestown, and an author. And he mapped the region and provided us with a vision through his writings of a goodly bay. That's his term, a goodly bay, saying that heaven and earth never agreed better to frame and place for man's habitation. And Pat Noonan, the founder of the Conservation Fund, Gil Grosvenor, chairman of National Geographic, and Will Baker, the president of Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and others, came up with this concept to develop a National Historic Water Trail that follows Smith's routes of exploration. And, you know, Pat hired me just after I arrived in D.C. out of grad school at the Conservation Fund and asked me to help pass this legislation. We soon formed the Friends of the John Smith Trail, which was later named the Chesapeake Conservancy, to organize community support for the trail concept and implementation. And part of our rationale was that the complexity of our conservation challenge here in the Chesapeake, it was really going to require us to collaborate and to connect imaginations and communities with these challenges, because they really exceed the capabilities of the individual organization, and even the individual discipline. They exceed the traditional partnerships that really require we require a broader base of engagement in this movement. But one of the first key steps we took was we partnered with National Geographic to create a wonderful map of the Chesapeake in John Smith's time that showed his route on one side of the Chesapeake and the Chesapeake today on the other. So this is a powerful juxtaposition, saying here's what the Chesapeake was and here's what it is. This map was helpful in motivating this and people and moving this concept forward. It attracted people that are interested in history, those in conservation, education, recreation, and provided a cultural connection to to folks to the history of American Indians in this region, which isn't as well known as it ought to be, and it's a very interesting topic for many people. So I put about 80,000 miles on my car to try and help move this legislation forward, and we met with mayors, county commissioners, businesses, Indian tribes, garden clubs, historical societies, conservation organizations, recreationists, and just individual citizens around this concept of a 3,000-mile trail, akin to the Appalachian Trail, but on water. The Appalachian Trail started out as a 1-foot footpath and grew to 1,000 feet on either side, stretching from Maine to Georgia. Our idea here was to start a water trail and to protect the shoreline and engage people in the restoration movement from the southern end of the bay all the way to Cooperstown. So we were very fortunate in that we passed that legislation in record time. We had terrific advice and guidance from people like Doug Wheeler and others who really were great friends and helped us accomplish this great trail in a short amount of time. At the same time, Sultana Projects built a replica of the boat that John Smith used to explore the Chesapeake and recreated the voyage with 12 brave individuals in the heat of the summer, bringing the John Smith Trail to 30 communities around the bay, bringing history to life, and bringing people into our movement. That's one picture. That's an event at Perryville where a lot of people got excited, or Port Deposit, sorry.
So the trail is done a reality. It's designated by Congress. The National Trail System Act says that national historic trails are to provide an opportunity to vicariously share the experience of the original users. So the original users, that's John Smith, that's American Indians. That's the people who inhabited, who were here when Smith made these exploratory voyages. So we developed we were required to develop a plan, a management plan for this 3,000-mile trail, and began to analyze, talk to hundreds of people throughout the watershed. I didn't put 80,000 miles on my car, but
you didn't crash here, did you?
Right. But we did. We had many public workshops, public meetings, talking with people about what this trail should be, what they wanted to see, what were the important places. And what became very clear through those conversations with people, but also through our viewshed analysis and through other planning tools, was that there were indeed many places that could vicariously provide that visitors with trail users with the experience of 400 years ago. And so that became then the focus of our attention, both in terms of a trail for visitors, but also in places to protect. And so these evocative landscapes, these indigenous landscapes, really became places that we focused our attention on through the plan. Okay, why isn't it advancing? Okay. Oh, sorry, went ahead too far.
That's okay. So that moves us into this collaborative trail conservation strategy. Now, most national parks. Oh,
that's okay. So we took that further. Let me just. Sorry, the slides weren't cooperating here. We took that further, and once the framework was set, began to gather with stakeholders on, in this case, the first segment on the James River, began to focus our attention in terms of what was important, again, what was important to people, how could we make this trail real in a relatively short time, and make it visible and visitor ready. So looking at places where we could strategically begin to make it real, and to be thinking about not only the visitors, but also how to protect these special places.
So most national parks have a land conservation plan that accompanies them once they're established. the National Park Service puts these things together. There wasn't any National Historic Trail that we knew of that had a land conservation plan. So the National Park Service and the Chesapeake Conservancy worked together to develop a stepwise process for identifying conservation priorities along the trail segments and the high potential trail segments, those that were evocative of the setting in John Smith's time. And that you can see some of those high priority areas highlighted in yellow there. The process really helps us prioritize relatively intact landscapes over those that are more fragmented and those that are evocative. Now, this next slide shows the sort of difference in areas where you would focus. And so we really focused on those relatively intact areas. Many of these priorities overlap with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's priorities for representative species and priority habitats, which is, it's great to collaborate between the two agencies. At the same time, we found a seldom used provision of the National Trail System Act to expand the trail by 840 miles by secretarial order, which Secretary Salazar did last month. This brings the trail all the way to Cooperstown, New York, further broadening the movement and drafting new people and new minds into our efforts. I now firmly believe that the John Smith Trail and the connecting trails are a major conservation innovation. They provide a river-based, large landscape, collaborative framework for conservation and public access in the Chesapeake. They're a cultural connection to our significant historical and ecologically valuable landscapes, and it provides a community engagement and commitment to the Bay restoration movement in a form that has yet to be seen. So the trail, while not innovative, it may not seem innovative at first, there was no region-wide vision like this for land conservation, and we've brought the pieces together here.
So in the again, the Cornerstones Executive Order Treasured Landscape Initiative, John Smith Trail, and now we want to talk very briefly about the latest effort to bring some additional resources through a Chesapeake Land and Water Conservation Fund collaborative effort. This is a new effort within the Department of Interior to strategically focus federal LWCF funds and build on existing authorities and existing federal assets, so national parks and national trails and wildlife refuges and BLM properties and so on, and at the same time state priorities, state assets, and the collaboration with land trusts and other nonprofits. So it's both an opportunity, it's also a requirement to get the focused attention that we're seeking. So our focus here in developing a proposal, really we're at what's called the pre-proposal stage here, was to focus on, again, river corridors, using the trail in part as the framework, but to blend cultural habitat and recreation values, and then to identify four initial focus areas. And one of them seems to be blocked out here, but the Nanticoke, which is right behind the list of multiple values and partners, the Middle Potomac, the Rappahannock, and then the James, Chickahominy, and a piece of the York. Those are the initial focus areas that we're proposing bring some additional funds. We wish it could be more, but this is the areas that we could, that given the rules of the game and given the assets and so on, that we could propose in this effort. And that's where we are right now in terms of making a proposal. Again, this builds right on this executive order strategy and this and the trail. And coordinating and targeting federal land conservation funding, creating this public-private partnership, and so on. So these things start to begin to come together in what we think is really building a great effort.
So really, this collaborative framework which we've described across states, federal agencies, conservation nonprofits, communities, it's really a huge step forward in the conservation effort here in the Chesapeake. In addition, I think the idea of basing a region-wide conservation strategy around the region's natural drainage system, its rivers and the bay, provides a very logical framework and immediately targets conservation lands where they'll provide significant benefit for whether it's water quality or scenic corridors for tourism, habitat for wildlife, flood protection for communities. I think we've nailed it. So the elements here are here for a strong regional conservation collaborative. A framework around the trail, a vision at the federal level for cooperation among agencies, state agencies with sophisticated conservation programs, NGOs like the Chesapeake Conservancy to develop the private funding that can seed conservation and to advance and organize and bring the idea to fruition, and private individuals who are engaged in this effort, whether it's their interest in history, in conservation, in culture, or recreation. We've got a lot of people interested in what we're trying to accomplish here. But, you know, we're just at the very beginning of this thing, really. We've got a long way to go, and this is just a piece of the whole Chesapeake conservation effort. Did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, it's just again, we want to emphasize that this is a part of clearly what needs to be a larger effort, but that it's a major opportunity to bring more resources, and that's what we're focused on. Our initial focus areas in this collaborative effort, this LWCF, are just as it says, the initial focus area. So
we promised Jim we'd keep it to 30 minutes, and we want to give plenty of time for questions. And I noticed that there's a bunch up on the screen. So Jim, did you want to take it away?
Yeah, I'll moderate the questions. I want to say extremely well done. You have done it within 30 minutes, and you have actually added audience members as you have taught, which is a very nice indication of people's interest in the topic that you're presenting. We now have, including people that are on the telephone lines and in this room, more than 70 people attending this meeting, which is a great number for an internet broadcast like this. So I'm going to start off the question and answer with a question from Tom Mortensen. Tom asks, collaboration in the form of action needs buy-in from the public. How responsive has the public been to these various actions?
Well, I'll take one crack at that, and that is in developing and doing the planning and so on for the John Smith Trail. As I said earlier, there was extensive outreach to the public. We spent a lot of time talking with people in really on just about every segment of the trail, and we continue to do that. It's the only way this thing is going to work, and there's been overwhelming and positive response. So that's my answer on
Well, no, I had a similar experience. I mean, in pursuing the trail, we had more support for the John Smith Trail than many congressional offices were expecting. A couple of them told me they got more letters of support for the John Smith Trail than letters against the Iraq War. So we certainly were getting a lot of public interest and involvement in our effort, and we try to continue to engage those folks and keep them excited. One thing about the trail that draws so many people in is it goes by someplace where they know and love, or a place where they grew up, or it touches the shores of their experience, their place in the Chesapeake. And I think that's really valuable and draws a lot of people in and engages them in what we're trying to do. Some people just water quality doesn't resonate with everybody. I think it's really important, and it's very important to me personally. But to some people, that's not enough of something to engage them in the movement. However, cultural resources and history or recreation or in their experience on the Chesapeake does draw them in. And so we have had an overwhelming amount of public support for what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Very good. A second question from Barb Heidenreich, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Does the treasure landscape concept at the federal level come with funds?
Well, it is a concept, and that's really our effort in terms of developing the trail conservation strategy with the Conservancy and others, and in going after these, putting this proposal together for the LWCF collaborative. That's the idea, is to get in the game and bring more resources. And our proposal is I forget honestly in the final summing up, but we're really trying to seek something on the order of initially of $60 million for land conservation from LWCF in just the initial year. If we're successful, that's 2014 budget. It's just paper money at this point.
Yeah, I'd say it's not automatic. It's very competitive. We need to provide an extremely convincing case. We need to demonstrate to people all of the background effort we've done to this point, the rationale, the modeling, the databases, the public support, the executive order, all that stuff. And then we need to work the politics on this thing. Really, there's politics involved here. At the administrative level, with the Obama administration, within the Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, and other agencies, and then at the congressional level, we need to have the congressmen and senators in the Chesapeake delegation support this initiative and see the wisdom of protecting these landscapes. So I can say that because I work for a nonprofit. I'm allowed to advocate. John may not be able to say that exactly, but we're going to be fighting for these funds, and letters of support, calls of support, letters to the editor, those sorts of things in support of what we're trying to achieve here will be very helpful.
Right. I want to add too that it really is about collaboration, and so while we're trying to bring in some additional federal dollars, this federal LWCF, the collaboration is about trying to bring in the private dollars, the public-private partnership that we spoke of earlier, work with states and whoever else we can bring to the table collectively to bring strategically focus and bring more resources. So while we've talked about federal LWCF, that's not the whole game by no means. Most land conservation in the Chesapeake has been done by the states, not by the federal government. But it's bringing all those pieces together. That's bringing more resources and focusing them. That's going to make this work.
Well, yeah, and getting the land trusts to work together on this is going to be really important as well. The Maryland Land Trust Conference held by MET 2 weeks ago had a large landscape focus, and they really did a wonderful job of trying to coordinate the land trust on a larger vision here for the Chesapeake. One of the things about this Special Places Fund is we're really trying to engineer it so it's an additional resource for those land trusts to accomplish some of these objectives. The MET used to have a wonderful land trust grant program, which was eliminated by the Maryland legislature in 2010, unfortunately. But it functioned terrifically to give land trusts some funding to accomplish conservation goals. We want this Special Places Fund, the private side funding of our initiative, to, in a sense, replace that grant fund, and then we want to engineer it around our trail initiative.
All right, so I have a pair of questions that I'm going to read to you from Nick Williams and Elizabeth Buxton, and I think they're both pointing at the same question and the issue that you were just raising, Joel. Nick Williams asks, who will negotiate with the landowners, and what operating funds will come to them under the LWCF proposal? And then Elizabeth Buxton asked at the same time, what is the criteria for the Special Places Fund, and what organizations can apply for these funds? Can landowners apply? Now, my understanding is that you're helping to put groups of landowners together so that LWCF funding could conceivably be used for easements or similar things. I'm not really certain of the details. Could you two address how private landowners can get involved both at the LWCF level and also at the state and local funding levels?
Yeah, I think both of those are very insightful questions, and of course they come to us from leaders in the land conservation movement here in the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake Conservancy itself does not do land conservation acquisition deals. We work with our partners at the Conservation Fund, the Nature Conservancy. We're trying to build relationships with land trusts so that we can execute deals through them. They have the experience, they've got the staff to execute those. We're just trying to bring new resources to bear for their work and trying to provide or suggest a framework for that, to organize that work. In terms of the criteria for the Special Places Fund, Elizabeth has run one of these funds before, so probably asked that for a very good reason. We really haven't developed stringent criteria so far. We've just been trying to build up some funds so that we can actually execute some conservation actions. But I'd love to talk with Elizabeth, because I'm sure you have some terrific suggestions as to guidelines for how to use those funds.
Excellent. So, I have another pair of questions. Eric Myers asks, beyond LWCF funding, state grants, and private philanthropy, do you see other potential sources of funding that partners in this regional landscape partnership can tap to implement the vision? And then the complementary question to that, again from Barb Heidenreich, is the private sector working on tourism initiatives that capitalize on the John Smith Historic Trail idea? Has this been documented in terms of contribution to tourism and the economy, or is it still too early for that?
So maybe let me take a stab at those two questions. On the tourism side of things, it's too early, but we've been developing with our on a trail-wide basis with the Conservancy and with others things like a boater's guide, which has been tremendously popular. There's an app that'll go live, I hope, next month, that will point people to different kinds of experiences. And at the local level, it's beginning to have some resonance. For example, on the James, where outfitters and others are interested in and wanting to and have begun to promote this idea of guided tours on the John Smith Trail. So it's a long effort here, but it's beginning to bear some fruit. I just forgot what the first question was. The first part of that.
The first from Eric Myers was, beyond LWCF funding, state grants, and private philanthropy, do you see other potential sources of funding that partners in this regional landscape partnership can tap to implement the vision?
So I think we're both going to take a stab at this, but yeah, I mean, for example, there are other federal funds. DOD, for example, has programs that have been helpful, and they have more money than we do. So that there are opportunities to use other sources of funding creatively to further our goals. DOD is the one in particular that immediately comes to mind. Joel?
Yeah, and I think there's a chance here to try and tap into ecosystem service markets as well, mitigation in the future. I know Eric's been a leader in the Chesapeake region and beyond in trying to orchestrate mitigation programs that benefit the environment, and I think if we could orchestrate those in coordination with this collaborative framework, that'd be great. The second thing is local government bond initiatives. I know across the country over the last decade, most of the land conservation funding has come from local bond initiatives. And I don't know how to do it, but if we could orchestrate some of those in support of these objectives, I think that would be terrific. I wanted to touch on the tourism comment. I think tourism is a major motivator and mechanism here to accomplish these goals. Early on, we took a boat ride with the president of the Maryland Watermen's Association, Larry Sims, who we were a little nervous at first that he might not be supportive of the John Smith Trail concept and land conservation. But I tell you what, he said right away, I'll tell you that the watermen would be great tour guides on the Chesapeake, and we want to protect those landscapes along those river corridors so that people have something to look at. And we've put together a Watermen's Heritage Tourism Training Program where we've trained 100 watermen now to give tours, and a small percentage of those folks I think are really going to make a business out of it. So that's one demonstration of how tourism is helping us to move this initiative forward. They're working in tandem with one another.
All right, I have another set of questions. I'll read them together and you guys can try to work with them. The first is from Denise O'Meara, who asks, I understand that Loudoun County, which is in Virginia, has opted out of the new recommended Chesapeake watershed best management practices. Can you talk about this? Chris West, in a similar vein, asks, to what extent have you established working partnerships with agencies and non-governmental organizations in New York State? And I would add a third stream to that set of questions, which is just generally, how do you manage or how do you envision managing intergovernmental cooperation when you're dealing with localities and counties and states? I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states in your region. There might be more. And different agencies within the federal government. How do you manage those intergovernmental relations and outreach to all of those agencies to tackle something as complicated as combined sewer overflow issues that are vexing for the Chesapeake Bay?
I think we're maybe a little out of our element here in that the sewer outflow and so on. That's a really others are dealing with that with EPA and so on. And the same with, I honestly don't know the answer to the question about Loudoun County, but that's again, that's within the realm and the purview of at least at the federal level with EPA. There's probably others on the phone actually who might be able to even answer some of those questions.
I did want to chime in on the New York State partnerships. The Otsego Land Trust has been a terrific partner. Has already started to acquire land along the newly established Susquehanna River leg of the John Smith Trail. Their executive director, Peter Hugic, is really a pioneering conservationist and doing a terrific job. Governor Cuomo wrote a very strong letter of support for that connecting trail, and his staff at the state level has been terrifically supportive. In addition, the Upper Susquehanna Coalition has been terrifically supportive as well. And so we're seeing very strong support from that section of the watershed for what we're trying to accomplish, and we're just now really starting to develop those partnerships and working relationships to start to implement some things on the ground up there.
Well, and some of those are actually outcomes of, or related at least to some of the work in terms of the development of water trails on the Susquehanna river system, including in New York State and really throughout Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And so those partnerships, those really local, generally local or regional efforts to develop water trails and with a recreational purpose, but really, and to bring, community values and so on to their rivers, to their sections of the river. That's really the foundation of a lot of this effort. I know the Conservancy, we in the National Park Service, the state, DCNR, and the Fish and Boat Commission, as well as others, they have all worked on these efforts on the Susquehanna, and then and into New York. Obviously, not the state organizations, but so there's a lot of. I mean, there's so much of this is really based on yes, the efforts to conserve lands, but also efforts to enjoy
and celebrate.
Absolutely.
And I tell you what, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has built a fantastic coalition on the Upper Susquehanna in New York and southern Pennsylvania as well. So I recommend you check out some of their work as well. We're going to plan to work very closely with them on implementation projects along that section of the river. I think it's interesting to note that we've really gotten this engagement through the rivers and public access, and it's very similar to what they did in the Blackfoot Challenge out west, is they first engaged people in the protection of the river and access to the river. And Jim, you probably know more about that than I do, but in doing my research on large landscape conservation, I thought it was interesting that there was a parallel there between the beginnings of our initiatives.
I think that's quite true, and I just want to comment that it's been evident to me as I've had a chance to visit the Chesapeake region several times in the last year, that this is an emerging effort and an emerging coalition to tackle some very large problems on a wide regional basis. And I'm sure that the timeline that you've shown, which goes back 20 years, has another 10 or 20 or 50 years of articulation going forward, where this coalition will become more effective and more intertwined. So it's up to the collective efforts of everyone on this call and more to tackle some of these problems. And I think that the questions that have been asked today by this audience reflect the very high level of sophistication already in the community for going in this direction. Barb Heidenreich has a complimentary comment, and then I have one more question before we close out. She notes that the more people get on the trail and witness the pollution issues and other issues to be dealt with, the more educated the communities and the constituent groups become, and the more support comes from grassroots to cleanup efforts. In conclusion, nice work, double exclamation point. So you all are obviously heading up the creek with a paddle. So let me close with one more question that touches on a point that we haven't really touched on yet, but which I think is very important to your community. It comes from Catherine Fall, and she asks, what is the role of the Native American community and the Native American communities in this collaborative effort?
Boy, we're really proud to say that there's been strong engagement from the American Indian community. I noticed one of our good friends, Deanna Beecham, is on the call here, who worked for the Virginia Council on Indians for the last decade. That council was just eliminated through some budgetary cuts, unfortunately, but Deanna and others have really helped us reach the American Indian community, engage them in our project, in our collaborative conservation effort, in an effort to both educate the public about the history of American Indians in this region, that they're still here, and that they're engage them in potential tourism and revenue-generating operations that may come out of this initiative. Did you?
Yeah, I'll just add two more things. One is that it's working with Deanna and others that there's this emerging concept of interpreting and identifying and hopefully protecting indigenous cultural landscapes has emerged through the trail, and that I think has great promise. But I also have to say that as much effort as we put into interpreting and identifying and trying to and work with Indian communities, it's not enough. We simply haven't really. I think we've only really scratched the surface. And
what's interesting is people are fascinated with American Indian culture too. On our old Friends of the John Smith Trail website, our page on American Indians got more hits than any other.
Right.
So it's an untapped, I think,
right,
intellectual and community idea and culture that we just haven't really reached. We just scratched the surface, like you said. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Let me just add to that seeing several Native American leaders and elders at the ceremony with Secretary Salazar last month speak eloquently about the connections between their communities and the European communities that have settled in the Chesapeake Bay was very important and very moving, and I thought their presentations were most eloquent. I want to
that gentleman was the spiritual leader of the Haudenosaunee, which actually Catherine Fall was one of our connections to. But he's an important guy. It was really nice of him to come all the way down to participate.
It really was. So let me remind all of our listeners that this internet broadcast and all the others that we've had over the last several years are posted on the website of the Project on Conservation Innovation, which is www.conservationinnovation.org, as well as on the Ash Center's website. They will very likely be posted for your review and for your transmittal to colleagues within the next week or so. We very much appreciate, Joel and John, your excellent presentations. We appreciate the audience's very high-level questions, and we will welcome all of you back to another Conservation Innovation Internet broadcast in the third quarter of 2012. Have a great afternoon, all of you, and we'll see you on the other side of the summer. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay.